Hi, my name is Deborah R. Richardson of Debra R. Richardson LLC, and I work with you to help you clean up your vendor data, clean up your vendor processes so that you can pay the right vendor. Now, this week's Vendor Master File tip of the week is AVM, a three-step process for vendor setup and maintenance so that you can avoid fraud, fines, and just overall bad vendor data when accepting vendor documents by email. And I know plenty of you still are accepting your vendor required documents for adding a new vendor or changing an existing vendor. All that's still coming via email, whether it's coming directly to the vendor team or it's coming into an internal team member and that team member submits it to the vendor team. So let's check out AVM. Now, AVM is an acronym for Authentication Validation Management. And so this is that three-step process. The first step is authentication because you want to make sure that you are speaking or communicating with your internal team member or your vendor and not a fraudster. So it's the same thing that when you contact your bank will ask you 2 to 3 identifying questions to make sure that you are who you say you are. And you need to make sure that you are actually talking to, again, your internal team member or your vendor when anyone contacts you related to vendor inquiries or submitting documentation for vendor ads or changes. And this can be via email or via phone. Now, once you have asked authenticating questions and know who you are communicating with, if that requester is submitting vendor supporting documentation for a vendor add or change, then you move to step two, which is validation, because you need to make sure that that information is valid. We have all been there when the information that was received from the vendor's point of contact doesn't really know their accurate legal name, tax ID combination with the IRS. And so you need to do validation such as validating the tax ID and other registration numbers with other countries. You also need to verify that they are not on any of the applicable watch lists that are required for your company or your industry, because if you do pay vendors that are on these lists, your company could be liable for um, penalties, both civil and criminal. And you also need to make sure you're standardizing how that vendor information is being entered into your vendor master file because you want to make sure that you eliminate the potential for duplicates. Now, once you get that information in your vendor master file, it does not stop there because you have to make sure that the information does not go stale and that the information remains valid. And so that means that periodically you need to clean your vendor master file and inactivate vendors that your company hasn't done business with for 15, 18, 24 months, whatever threshold works well. And then with the remaining vendors, you need to revalidate that information because the vendors won't always tell you when their information has changed, especially if it does not affect their payments. And so you need to make sure that you're doing that bulk upload for the IRS 10 match, that you're rechecking those vendors against the watch list or applicable watch lists or sanctions lists to make sure they haven't been added since you recently or since you onboarded them or checked them last. And lastly, this is a perfect time to do a duplicate vendor check because we all know that duplicate vendors can be an indicator of fraud, and at the very least, they can result in duplicate payments. Now, within this three-step framework, there are 5 authentication techniques, 27 internal controls, 17 best practices, and 16 vendor validations. And you can learn all of these on the Vendor Process Training Center, which is a platform that is dedicated to training sessions. As a matter of fact, I have 45 of them that are on nothing but the vendor setup and maintenance process. Now, this three-step vendor setup and maintenance process workshop is 4 hours, but it does go over each of the five authentication techniques, 27 internal controls, 17 best practices, and 16 vendor validations. So make sure you check it out. I have the link on the screen, but I will also have it on or within the description. All right, so if you would like more information on how to improve your vendor process, please go to my website at deborarrichardson.com for free tools and resources to avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. Now, if you'd like, again, over 149 annual hours of training for your vendor team with 45 vendor process training sessions, check out the Vendor Process Training Center at training.deborarrichardson.com. So good luck and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to be notified next Tuesday for the next Vendor Master File tip of the week.